So I want to say something, first of all, about considering the different relationships that we can have to suitors and suitor study and their place in our practice. I'm imagining that all of you have some interest in suitors, otherwise you wouldn't come to this. And I also realized I was saying to Rob that I neglected to find a sexy title for this particular session. So it just said Honeyball Sutta, a little bit cryptic. So I imagine that at least wasn't off-putting to you. And some of you were curious or knew that that was a sutta, an important sutta that you'd like to revisit. But you know, sometimes we can find the suttas quite dry and unrelatable. Sometimes we can find them inspiring, intimidating, fascinating, exasperating, so forth. And for me, I've been through patches of, you know, more and less interest in the suttas. Some of us, maybe we just know a small handful of suttas and like to kind of keep pondering those few suttas. And some people want to throw themselves in and read the whole Pali Canon and so forth. And I just, from my perspective, there's no one relationship, one right relationship to have with the suttas. You know, it's like, how can I use them to nourish my practice? And do I, you know, are we interested in looking at the Pali or just looking at suttas in English, or if they're available in our other native language? And I always like to remind myself that at the time of the Buddha, most people only heard one or two teachings. You know, we sort of think because all this stuff is available to us that we need to kind of get on top of it all or master it all. But actually, any one sutta is a doorway into a lot of, potentially the whole of Dharma. So we don't have to, it's about the quality of our engagement really with the teaching rather than the quantity of teaching. So I imagine that at the time of the Buddha, most people will have heard very few teachings. Of course, there were certain monks and nuns who will have heard a lot and some who memorized them and so on. But those would have been a minority of the people who learned from the Buddha. So my own background with this is that I'm not a Pali scholar. I'm not a Buddhist scholar either. I'm just a practitioner who enjoys reading suttas. And maybe partly because my degree at college was in Latin and Greek literature, I could sort of feel a little less intimidated by ancient texts than sometimes we might be. And then as a nun, I learned to chant various traditional Pali chants, which included some suttas and passages that come from the suttas. So that was my first introduction to those, to the suttas. And then through the little book that some of you might know, Jnanatiloka's The Word of the Buddha, which was about the first sort of anthology of translations of the suttas put together before all these translations by people like Bhikkhu Bodhi were published. So that was when I joined the monastery in the mid-90s. That was the thing that was available to us, was this little booklet, The Word of the Buddha. And then around the same time, also Bhikkhu Bodhi published the translation of the Majjhima Nikaya, the Middle Length Discourses. And I kind of threw myself into that because I felt that was the way to get closer to the Buddha and to his world. Yeah. Slightly naively, I think I thought, if I give up reading everything else, all the things that kind of enmesh us in this very crazy world that we're all living in right now, and stop reading newspapers and things and just read the Majjhima Nikaya, somehow I could kind of plonk myself into the mindset of a ancient bhikkhuni, and that would be really helpful. And of course, that was very naive. And I now realize, we can't just immerse ourselves in the thought world of the Buddha, because we're coming at it through a certain perspective, which is what today's sutta is all about. But still, it's a really useful exercise to try to get a little closer to what he might have been thinking and meaning. And now, of course, we also have online all these wonderful things like access to Insight and Sutta Central. So why this sutta? I think, like probably most of you, I realized really early on in my practice that how much unhelpful thinking that my mind engages in. Anyone else have that issue? And I came across the word papancha, which I initially understood, and still one could, loosely think of it as excessive unhelpful thinking. And this sutta, the Honeyball Sutta, really addresses this question of papancha and refines our understanding of it. So I became familiar with it through what it had to say about papancha. I'm guessing everybody is familiar with this word papancha, P-A-P-A-N-C-A. So this is the topic of this sutta, but also when one looks not just at the kind of section on papancha itself, but at the whole sutta, the sutta is really also about conflict and non-conflict and our capacity to listen, which is why I think it's so important and so relevant to us right now. And then it gets its name, the honey ball or honey cake, because of what Ananda says to the Buddha at the end of the sutta. Oh, it's as if a hungry, thirsty, tired person had come across this sweet treat, sweet, nourishing treat, like a honey cake. And the Buddha said, okay, yes, exactly. Let's call it the honey cake discourse. So I was trying to think of a contemporary equivalent, and there were too many options. So you have to pick your own, whether that's, the chocolate fudge sundae, or most Dharma practitioners I know are too healthy to have that as your kind of top hit, but something of that case. So my proposed approach, I was asking Rob also what you normally like to do about breaks with these 3-hour sessions. And I'm just going to sort of play it by ear and ask you from time to time, do you need a break yet? But I'm proposing that we have 1 or 2 breaks in our 3-hour time. And maybe take some sort of quiet time also at some points. But I think that this sutta can be considered in 3 parts, if you like. The sort of first part that sets the scene and presents a problem. The second part, which is like the diagnosis of the problem. And then the third part is what can be done about it. And the middle part is by far the longest, because this teaching is really, it's a descriptive sutta rather than a prescriptive sutta, in it that it's mostly concerned with describing how something arises rather than going into a lot of teaching of what you therefore have to do about it. So when we get to considering what to do about it, then we kind of pull in resources from elsewhere. So the sutta, it's Majjhima Nikaya number 18, and I put in the chat the link to a PDF. Some of you might have the book with you. You don't have to look at it, read it. You can just listen if you like. And I thought I might call on volunteers to read portions of the text as we go along, because I really don't want to listen to myself for all this time together. But see how you feel. You don't have to open up the text. And in some ways, it's maybe better to listen rather than to get bogged down in fishing around on your screen. So any questions before we jump in? And please maybe just unmute yourself and shout if you have a question before we jump in. Okay. So as I said, it's in the Majjhima Nikaya, and the Majjhima Nikaya is the place where we find the middle-length discourses that they tend to give us more backstory or more story than the sutras in the Anguttara or the Samyutta Nikaya. So we get a sort of context and a way, which is, I think, why I really enjoyed engaging with that as the sort of the first volume of Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations, because they situate the Buddha in his society, in his world. And I'd say this one we can think of it maybe as a little drama with 5 scenes. So the first one is the Buddha. He's staying in his home area, and he's been wandering for alms, and he comes back, and then he has an encounter with Dandapani, another person from his same village or town, who is known to him. And then he recounts this encounter to the monks in the second scene. And then he leaves the monks, and the monks have a conversation amongst themselves where they realize they haven't quite understood what he said and they should have asked him. And then a scene between the monks and Mahakachana, who they go to ask to explain further what the Buddha said. And then the last scene is that the monks go back to the Buddha to say, what do you think of what Mahakachana told us? So we're going to go through it sort of scene by scene. We might skip over some of the scenes, but I think the first part is really nice to read in full. So is there somebody here who would be happy to volunteer to read for us the first part of the PDF I posted? Miranda, thank you. I saw your hand first. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thus I have heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country at Kapilavatthu in Nirodha's park. In the morning, the Blessed One dressed and went into Kapilavatthu for alms. After his meal, he went to the great wood for the day's abiding and sat down at the root of a bilva sapling for the day's abiding. Dandapini, the Sakyan, while walking and wandering for exercise, also went to the great wood, and he went to the bilva sapling where the Blessed One was and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he stood at one side, leaning on his stick, and asked the Blessed One, "What does the recluse assert? What does he proclaim?" Buddha, "Friend, I assert and proclaim such a teaching that one does not quarrel with anyone in the world, with its gods, its maras, its brahmas, with its recluses and brahmins, its princes and its people. Such a teaching that perceptions no more underlie that Brahmin who abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, free of worry, free from craving for any kind of being." When this was said, Dandapani the Sakyan shook his head, wagged his tongue, raised his eyebrows, and departed.
Thank you, Miranda. So this Dandapani, his name means stick in hand. And the commentaries say that he even when he was young, he used to go about with this gold walking stick, which is considered a kind of conceit or a sign of arrogance. So I don't know if you know that in the monastic rule, there's this little rule about you're not supposed to teach somebody who's carrying a stick, maybe because it could be used as a weapon, or maybe it's a sign of kind of disrespect. So he's kind of a somewhat arrogant person. It says that he doesn't need it on account of his age. It's not like a walking stick. It's a kind of, yeah, an affectation. And that he is possibly he's said to be the Buddha's uncle, although I find that kind of weird, because if he's both supposed to be young and not in need of a stick, and he's older than the Buddha, I'm assuming the Buddha's not young by this point in the discourses, but anyway, who knows? But he's also known for having taken Devadatta's side, the Buddha's cousin Devadatta, who tried to cause a schism in the Sangha. This Dandapani sided with Devadatta. So Dandapani is somebody who has a bit of a grudge against the Buddha. And so it says in the discourse he approached the Buddha and he made the usual courteous and amiable greeting. They did their small talk, but then he stood to one side leaning on his stick, and he said this rather impolite or yeah, not very respectful way of addressing the Buddha. What does the recluse proclaim? What does he assert? This is the samana, recluse. So this is a not very respectful way of addressing the Buddha. And it says, so it's like he's saying, well, tell us what your teaching's all about then. It's like, it's not, he hasn't got a real Dharma question to bring. It's just like, yeah, all right, so what are you all about? And so the Buddha gives him this very short answer. Friend, I assert and proclaim such a teaching that one does not quarrel with anyone in the world. And this recalls another sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, in the section on the khandhas, where the Buddha says, Bhikkhus, I do not dispute with the world, rather it is the world that disputes with me. A proponent of the Dharma does not dispute with anyone in the world. Yeah, this is an interesting thing to contemplate. What does he mean by that? So unlike Dandapani, who's going almost looking for a fight, the Buddha never goes looking for a fight. So people might come and start arguing with him, but he doesn't go and start an argument with others. And in this sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, which is Samyutta Nikaya 2294, it's called the Flowers Sutta. And in your PDF, further down at the end of your PDF, I've put the references of all the other suttas that I'm going to reference this morning. So they're there for you. You don't have to worry about writing this down. But he goes on to say, in terms of arguments, that he agrees with the wise people in the world as to things which exist and things which don't exist. He doesn't dispute with people's ordinary common sense ways of describing and languaging the world. But he points out, if you like, the ways in which things exist, and the things that exist and things that don't exist. So in that sutta, he's talking about the five khandhas, the body, feelings, perception, and so forth, and saying that he doesn't say that there's no such thing, but he says that you can't find a permanent, unchanging version of such a thing. So he's getting really sort of particular about what you can say you see and know and what is not seen and known. And in that way, he doesn't dispute with other people in the world. And then so in our sutta, the Honeyball Sutta, he then goes on to say, so I such a teaching that I don't quarrel with anyone in the world, and such a teaching that perceptions no more underlie that Brahmin who abides detached from sensual pleasures without perplexity, free of worry and free of craving for any kind of being. So perceptions no more underlie that Brahmin. So Dandapani has referred to him as a recluse, and he refers to himself as a Brahmin. And he's not a Brahmin, of course. We know that the Buddha was from the warrior caste, but you may be familiar with, remember, teachings where the Buddha talks about what really makes a Brahmin and what doesn't. Yeah. So in the Dhammapada, for instance, there's a chapter on Brahmins, where the Buddha says that a Brahmin is somebody who is basically freed from greed, hatred, and delusion. That's a true Brahmin. It's not about caste. It's about nobility of being, if you like. So, and then this strange expression, perceptions no more underlie. The Pali is sanya nanusenti, and this is this verb that's made up of not, na, anu alongside, and si ati. So it's not lying alongside or not underlying, not being implied or inclined towards. So we can say a person is not preoccupied or taking a stand on particular preconceptions, because Dandapani is really identified with his views and his preconceptions. And then the last thing that the Buddha says is that he also abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, free of worry, and free from craving for any kind of being. So you'll recognize here detachment from sense pleasures and detachment from, or freedom from worry and perplexity, doubt and worry, as without hindrances in the mind. Yeah. So it's the same language in many of these instances as the hindrances. And then free from craving for any kind of being. The Pali is without tanha. As we know, tanha is craving for either becoming or non-becoming. Yeah. And so, having heard this from the Buddha, Dandapani kind of furrows his brow, wags his tongue. This seems to be what they did in those days to express confusion and perplexity, raised his eyebrows and left leaning on his stick, shaking his head. And this is something that Mara does also in some of his encounters with the Buddha. When the Buddha says something to Mara that doesn't kind of meet Mara's hopes and expectations, Mara pulls these faces and leaves in disgust. Yeah. So this to me is a kind of really interesting thing to think about, how we approach teachings, how we approach listening generally, how we approach conversations. Some of you might know my pal slash colleague Oren Sofer, who's written books on communication and so forth. And I think it was from him. I don't know if he coined the term, but he was the first person who drew my attention to this idea of predatory listening. Have you heard that term? You know, so listening, waiting to find fault with something, I think it means, or waiting to find where we can get into the attack or the argument. Or perhaps if you think of a predator as waiting, what can I get for myself out of this exchange? And I think the Buddha can sense that some of this is going on, and that Dandapani is not really interested or open to teaching, and therefore he gives him this answer, which is not only short, it's truthful, but also to me it sounds like a little bit of a rebuke. Don't know whether it strikes you in that way also. So do we come loaded with preconceptions to our meetings with others? You know, these people have this kind of view, alike or alike this. You know, it's really interesting, isn't it? The expectations that we bring. Even, well, not even, I mean, largely around simple things like appearance. You know, so it's sort of on my mind at the moment, because those of you who will know me will know that until like 10 days ago, I had long hair, which I've had for the last 20 years. And it's really interesting to see the difference in perception around having long hair or short hair suddenly. Or whether you're a tall person or a short person, how people relate to that. The color of one's skin, of course, one's age, you know, how we make assumptions about how people are going to speak or whatever on the basis of what they look like, or all these sorts of things, you know. And on the context, you know, so is it a kind of encounter where we anticipate that there's something that we are going to want to defend or attack or get our view over with? And to what extent does this inhibit our ability to hear and to hear the Dharma, or to listen to new ideas? Yeah. So what are the helpful attitudes to bring? So I'd just like to throw this open to you for a moment or two in quiet to just ponder, and then see whether anyone has any comments or reflections or experiences around this that you'd be up for sharing.
I guess I just wanted to maybe say something. I'm not sure I'm on the right track with this, but are you trying to say, like, I come from a family with a lot of sisters? I have 9 sisters. And let's just say now we're all aging, you know, we're much older now, you know, going into our 60s, 70s. And like when we get together and you're trying to communicate with these people that you don't live with, you know, you just like come together for lunch or whatever. But it's like everybody still, it's like this weird thing, this weird tension, because, you know, it's almost like I feel like they're expecting me to say or, agree with this or not agree with, and then I'm like, no, I don't do that anymore, just like, or I don't think like that anymore. Or even me, I'm ready to like, as soon as they say, nope, 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 don't turn the corner, just like it gets to be this weird, is it something like that, that this is, or,
Yes.
okay.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a really good example of this. Like, especially in family, this happens so much that we have these kind of preconceptions about what we expect of each other and how we all are. And it's funny you should say this because I'm one of 5 sisters, and we've got a very rare date next weekend. This time next week, we're all having dinner together, and you know, people don't know what we're engaged with, what we're interested in now, and how we might have changed. We still see each other as our, you know, selves from way back.
Yeah. The little sister without any money, or the other sister that, always needs help, or the other sister that always comes to the, it's just, you keep your same, it's just like, no, people change. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Any other reflections or experiences around this? That'd be anybody. Miranda, yeah. Hi.
Okay, very quickly, we think of sort of naively of spiritual people as people who like don't take sides, as opposed to people who engage in taking sides. But it's what I'm interested in this sutta is how you engage without furthering the conflict, fomenting unrest. Because I know there's a bunch of places where the Buddha, like tried to stop a war, and tried to help people with the actual conflict, not transcending the conflict, but engaging the conflict. And I'm super interested in that because I'm kind of like, I appear to be more placid than I am. And behind the surface, I am quite a predatory listener, So like, I'm really interested in that personally.
Thank you. I think that's a great question, and it's really important. Like, so yes, it can sound from this like the suggestion is that we should never take a stand on anything. And there's a way in which that is true, or a way in which that might be a helpful vision of the world to have. And there's a way in which it's an unhelpful vision of the world to have. And I think, both have their place dependent on the context. And I think we can get further into that as we go further into the sutta. So you're absolutely right that the Buddha did take a stand on certain things, but how do we take a stand without furthering a conflict or escalating a conflict? And I notice, like, as you say, we do have our predatory listening hats on. And I've been recognizing in myself. So I was just, in fact, coming to you next Saturday. Those of you who are regulars here, you have Martine Batchelor, and she and I were just teaching together in Holland. And one of our briefs for this course we were teaching was to talk about a bit about the history of the different Buddhist traditions and the Mahayana and the Hinayana, and this kind of derogatory attitude that we assume towards different Dharma groups as well, as let alone, people of different persuasions sometimes. And actually, noticing for myself how just expressions like or people saying, and so this may be, maybe how you all see yourself, and I'm not finding fault with this, I'm just owning up to my own reactivity towards it. But if somebody says to me, I'm an engaged Buddhist, or I'm a secular Buddhist, I can easily assume that they are making an assumption about me if I don't call myself an engaged Buddhist or a secular Buddhist, that I'm a superstitious traditional Buddhist, or that I'm a disengaged, uncompassionate Buddhist who's not interested in the rest of the world, and so forth. So how these expressions can put us on the defensive or put us on the attack is really interesting to notice. Yeah. And how when we can recognize that that's happening, we have the chance to maybe bracket it off a little and open the heart and open the ears. And then we're able to receive in a different way what's being offered, and maybe able to be surprised and actually receive new information. So another example from my side, I know Ajahn Sucitto is a very popular teacher. Some of you might know him, senior monk in the Thai forest tradition in England. But during the 90s, again, when I was a novice and anagarika and spent time at Chithurst and he was the abbot, I got really aversive to his Dharma talks and to his teachings, so much so that I would get really wound up when it was my turn to do the formal business of requesting the Dharma talk. And I was thinking, here I am, I have to do this chant to ask Ajahn Sucitto to give a Dharma talk. And I can't bear the thought of listening to him for an hour. And with that kind of attitude, I failed to hear some of his, the really exquisite teaching that he was offering at times, I would say. And still offers, and it's only much later that I've been able to appreciate in many ways what an excellent teacher he is. But at that time, I was so primed with aversion that I couldn't really, take it in. So it's just very interesting for all of us to be a little bit, have some self-honesty and some curiosity and maybe a bit of humor also about, what are we bringing to are we meeting stuff afresh with an open mind or not? Jerry, please.
I find the word predatory questioner is a little bit concerning to me because the definition of that, nobody dances by themselves. And so I do realize at times, and I try not to be annoying, I'm a little oppositional. And only lately I realize, there's some depth to that. I am trying to learn. I'm not trying to undermine the teachings of the speaker. So that when this person says predatory listeners, it seems as if he is not owning up to his own ego's response to a challenging question. So depending, and you talk about Sucitto, you could ask him anything. I've never seen him get defensive. I think he has a tendency maybe to respect people's inquiry. So I'm defending the what I hear is a slight put down of people who ask questions that the communication expert doesn't sort of care for.
Thank you for putting that perspective. And I think it's a good illustration of the fact that, it's, even in the calling out of quote unquote predatory listening, there's some agenda or something that's being taken a stand on in order to call that out. And this is where we're going to come on to actually, is it possible to come with a blank slate in any way? There's always, I notice that my personal reactivity, and I think you kind of perhaps what you said about the taking an oppositional stance made me realize, well, yeah, there's a real benefit to being willing to take an oppositional stance. And I remember hearing somewhere recently that there is that some research had shown that whether one is a conservative in terms of valuing, preserving the tradition of the past and what's of importance from the past versus breaking new ground, introducing new ideas, stirring things up, unsticking what's stuck, has less to do with your social class or position or anything, or economics or anything like that, than actually with temperament. And we're about 50-50, no matter what our background, in terms of the split of what kind of temperament we have. So each of us, perhaps we could wonder, is bringing a certain temperament to a discussion anyway, before you even have your conditioned views and so forth. So I think it's really good to be sensitive to this, and we can explore it a little bit further. So let's go on a little bit longer, and we'll take a break, or maybe let's take 2-3 minutes if you want to stand up and stretch or something. I'm a great believer in moving up and away from my screen if anyone wants to stand and stretch, and then we'll look at the next chunk of the sutta. Yeah, so the next scene in our sutta is that evening the Buddha goes to join the rest of the monks, and he tells them the story of what happened when he met with Dandapani. And it's one of the places that piques my interest. Well, I wonder what he actually said to the monks. Buddhas don't gossip, allegedly, but you can imagine he said something, I met that Dandapani out there, or and he came up to me with his stick, and then but I don't know, this is pure speculation. But anyway, he tells the Buddha, the monks, what happened, and they ask him what he meant. So would somebody else be willing to read scene 2 for us in my...
In the evening, the Blessed One rose from meditation and went to Nigrudha's park, where he sat down on a seat and told the bhikkhus what had taken place. Then a certain bhikkhu asked the Blessed One, "But, Venerable Sir, what is the teaching that the Blessed One asserts, whereby one who does not quarrel with anyone in the world? And, Venerable Sir, how is it that perceptions no more underlie that Brahmin who abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, free of worry, free from craving for any kind of being?" Buddha: Bhikkhus, as to the source through which perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a man, if nothing is found there to delight in, welcome, and hold on to, this is the end of the underlying tendency to lust, to aversion, to views, to doubt, to conceit, to desire for being, to ignorance, to rods and weapons, of quarrels, brawls, disputes, recrimination, malice, and false speech. Here these evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. After saying that, the Blessed One rose from his seat and went into his dwelling.
Thank you. It's so lovely hearing you all read like this. Really great. Thank you so much. So here we have the introduction of this idea of perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation. This Pali word is a compound word made up of papancha, sanya, perception, and sankar, which is like the thinking of sankharas. Papancha, sanya, sankar. So we'll talk about maybe that a bit more about that when we talk about how it's all put together, but it's not a word that seems to occur much anywhere else, and it's quite difficult to translate the kind of this way that Pali puts together different words into a bit like German, I guess. Those of you, I'm not a German speaker, but if any of you are German speakers, and maybe some other languages that you know as well, that they can't, it compounds words like this. But perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation seems to be a reasonably good translation. And these are said to beset a person or a man. It's using purisa, which is a man, but what it means, the person is the individual or the personality. So purisa is actually related to, it has the same root as the persona, purisa, the personality. So Bhikkhu Sujato says that this is the conventional sense of self that comes from desire and ignorance. Like, it takes a me to get beset by views and opinions or notions, perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation. And then this is the thing that I think is really significant. It doesn't talk about eradicating these papancha sanya sankars, these perceptions and notions. It says, if nothing is found to delight in, welcome and hold to in the sources of these proliferations, then this is the end of the underlying tendencies to these unwholesome qualities of desire, repulsion, views, doubt, conceit, the desire to be reborn. And this means the desire to be reborn as this or that. And ignorance. And then the end of quarrels, disputes, malice, and false speech. False speech is musavada. And that really, implies and contains all the forms of false speech as well, or of wrong speech, as well as telling untruths. So I've already given you my view, but I was going to ask you all, I mean, what do you see as the main problem here? Where is the Buddha pointing to the problem? Or does anybody have a different view or thought about what is the issue?
It's so nice to see you. This is wonderful to hear this being read out loud. Well, it's interesting that you started with the perpetrative aspect of it, because what this just illuminated in a way that conjured it up in my body was this, aha, here I am with the whole going forward of the result of the thinking, right? So it's like, as long as that's this ingrained piece of it, the whole mess is, proliferated, if you will, right? So it's awe-inspiringly illuminating. The way reading this in conversation is showing me the whole root of it's just so instantaneous that it comes forward. And the relief, the way I'd love to have those adjectives repeated, the descriptive ways of feeling like that it can just fall apart like rain. And it's such a relief that is the outcome of, kind of your last couple of sentences of what investigating, when you just can let that go on by, how beautiful that feels in my body, right? To just let that come to rest and not engage it in a practice kind of a way. It's so liberating. It's so joyful.
That's lovely to hear. Elizabeth.
I'm not sure if I'm going to answer the question that you posed after reading this, but coming back actually to what Miranda had to say earlier about engaging without like contributing to conflict, in some way. And a long time ago, when I started meditation, and I became aware of just how, I had these views, about back then it was about apartheid and, a whole load of things. And not on a regular basis, but I can remember some arguments that I got into. And I mean, the other person must have thought I was bonkers, but I just wrote me off as a kind of, not to be listened to. But I remember feeling ill for a week, like about the rage that I'd felt, and so because these incidents were kind of really strong at this big early days in practice, I realized that I just had to kind of put myself on the back burner, and I was not to get involved in anything that I felt strongly about. And that went on for a long, long time, and it took me a long time to realize that it's not about, I mean, I know, so it's not about having the views, it's about the rigidity of them, the attaching to them. But what I saw was the self, how much of me, this was me. I was someone that was going to, save the world and blah, 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 and all that. But what I now, over a period of time come to is that, yes, I mean, I've got values, but it's more kind of like an ethical stance. And so I think, and also the recognition that, I know it sounds stupid, but I know I can't save the world, I can't save anybody, I can't save anything, I can only think about how I'm trying to engage in being in this world and take responsibility for what I do, and above all, not having an expectation that anything is going to come of it. That it's just going to be, and it's really complicated. It's really not straightforward at all, and it's a process. It's like I say, I'm not sure I was answering a question or whatever, but I was interested in what Miranda said, and you saying that we would come later maybe in our being together, in the third part, maybe about, skillful ways of, I mean, I think I am aware what they are, but it'd be interesting, and I'm really enjoying this very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I think as you illustrate the predicament beautifully, and also the journey that I think most of us are engaged in and have been going through in practice, from kind of, I think everybody who comes to Dharma comes with a kind of sense of wanting to make the world a better place, and to, do what we can to contribute to the alleviation of suffering. And I think especially when we're young or when we're more naive, we can get very, very identified with the positions that we, adopt as a result of that. But then through practice, we begin, and practice and maybe just maturity and having more knowledge of the world and more information, we realize the complexity of it. And then practice becomes more about, the famous expression of awakening as having the appropriate response from the Zen tradition. And one of my co-teachers at Gaia House recently was talking about sila, about ethics, and answering somebody's or trying to respond to somebody's questions about an ethical dilemma, and saying, reflecting that the Buddha he didn't give us a map with all the roads laid out on it. He basically gave us a compass and said, okay, there's the compass. You have to navigate with the compass, but you can't chart every map that every individual is going to have to take. And I just found that idea of the compass rather than the map, for me, was quite helpful, resonant. But yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, let's it's so nice hearing you all read the sutta. I'd wonder whether to have somebody read the kind of let's have this is the kind of intermission, maybe the next scene, where, well, scene 3 and scene 4, I would say part 1, scene 4, part 1. We can skip over scene 3, which is where the monks realize that the Blessed One's gone, and they think, oops, he gave us a summary and brief without telling us the detail. Who can we go ask for the detail? And then they think of Mahakachana, who is a wise older monk, and so they go visit Mahakachana, and that takes us to what I've called scene 4, part 1. And would somebody like to read that for us? And we can just, the rest of us, maybe close our eyes and just contemplate, okay, what would it be like to be in the entourage of the Buddha at that time, or whatever that means for you? Would somebody like to read? It's so nice hearing different voices.
Then the bhikkhus went to the Venerable Mahakachana and exchanged greetings with him. They sat down to one side and told him what had taken place. Let the Venerable Mahakachana expound it to us. Venerable Mahakachana replied, friends, it is as though a man needing heartwood, seeking heartwood, wandering in search of heartwood, thought that heartwood should be sought for among the branches and leaves of a great tree standing possessed of heartwood, after he had passed over the root and the trunk. Similarly, you think that I should be asked about the meaning of this instead of the Blessed One when you were face to face with the teacher earlier. That Blessed One knows what should be known, sees what should be seen, and is the one with eyes, the one with wisdom, has become the teaching, Dhamma, has become like Brahma, practices what he preaches, has come to the essence and gives the deathless, is the master of the teaching, the Lord of the Dhamma, the Tathagata. This is the time to ask its meaning from the Blessed One, so that we could keep it in our minds. As he told you, so you should have remembered it. The bhikkhus. Surely, friend Kachana, knowing the Blessed One knows, seeing he sees. He is vision, the Tathagata. That was the time when we should have asked the Blessed One the meaning. Yet the Venerable Mahakachana is praised by the teacher and esteemed by his wise companions in the holy life. The Venerable Mahakachana is capable of expounding the detailed meaning of this summary given in brief by the Blessed One. Let the Venerable Mahakachana expound it without finding it troublesome.
So anybody, before we move on, does anybody have any responses or comments on that passage, which we find in a couple of other discourses? Jessica, yeah.
I have one small one, which is in the passage with the Buddha. The part that I like the best is where he gets up and walks away. It's like a mic drop. And I feel like Mahakachana is kind of underlying that also. It's very sweet and makes me laugh a little.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I find that again, this is like maybe an example of my predatory reading. I find myself these days, especially as a teacher who has to kind of occasionally prepare Dharma talks and things like that, I will kind of scooch to the kind of pith bits of the suttas that I need my material for. And these are the kinds of bits that I might tend to skip over. And I'm really enjoying, the brief that I gave myself for this morning, and the sort of thing that I assumed that this session might be about, of actually taking more time with the sutta and taking the time to read it thoroughly. And also it's really nice hearing it read aloud. And I found that sense of actually, listening to all these sort of epithets, if you like, of the Buddha as being somebody who's knows what should be known and seen what should be seen and practices what he preaches and things. It's kind of inspiring to me. And again, often don't take the time to linger with that kind of contemplation. Yeah. Even though part of my mind will just bracket this, oh yeah, we know that's a formula that gets applied in this situation and that situation. But I think there's a reason that some of these passages get repeated and over. If you think about the practice of transmitting suttas through recitation, this is the kind of bhakti chorus, the devotional chorus as well, in a way, that comes in this particular sutta. Okay, good. Will somebody read? Let's see, where are we at in terms of time? Let's go on a little while, and then we'll have a break. But would somebody be up for reading Scene 4, Part 2A? And I'm not going to get you to read Part 2B aloud. It's too much, but I think this one that I've called Part 2A, somebody could read it for us.
Venerable Mahakachana, then listen, friends, and attend closely to what I shall say. The Blessed One mentioned this: Bhikkhus, as to the source through which perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a man, if nothing is found there to delight in, welcome, and hold to, this is the end of the underlying tendency to lust. This is the end of resorting to rods and weapons. Here these evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. I understand the detailed meaning of it to be as follows. Dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. What one feels, that one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, that one mentally proliferates. With what one has mentally proliferated as the source, perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a man with respect to past, future, and present forms cognizable through the eye. Similarly, dependent on the ear and sounds, dependent on the nose and odors, dependent on the tongue and flavors, dependent on the body and tangibles, dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. What one feels, that one perceives. What one feels, that one perceives and thinks about. What one thinks about, that one mentally proliferates. With what one has mentally proliferated as the source, perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a man with respect to past, future, and present mind objects cognizable through the mind.
So if this is a little confusing, at the end, you scroll down through that document. I'm hoping that those of you who want to open it have been able to open it. That on the 8th page of the document, I just listed the process here that goes from the sense organ, and so this is the coming together of the sense organ, the object of awareness that lands in that sense organ, so the sight and the eye and a functioning consciousness, or those three come together in a moment of contact. So when there's consciousness and a active or a functioning sense organ and something lands on it, so a sound landing on the ear, or in the sixth sense, of course, in Dhamma, a thought landing on the mind, there's contact. When there's contact, there's feeling tone, Vedana. So that sense of registering the contact as pleasant or unpleasant, or neither pleasant or unpleasant. And this is a whole spectrum. So it's sort of registering along the spectrum from pleasant to unpleasant. And what one feels, one perceives. Perception is the act of recognizing or labeling or identifying something as something in the mind. That primary recognition of, say, a sneeze as the sound of a sneeze, or you look and you see window or screen, so forth. What one perceives, one thinks about, vitaka. So this is the mind. The mind applies it to itself. It starts a thought process, that taking it up by the mind. So you might know the terms vitaka and vichara. It's singling out the object for attention, like that with the mind. And then thinking proliferates with this papancha, this proliferation. Thanissaro Bhikkhu doesn't translate papancha as proliferation. He translates it as objectification, because it's making the thing that's perceived into an object that's out there in relation to me. So it's starting to reify, to concretize, and take a stand in relation to the object. So it's something that's a little bit more kind of elaborated, if you like, than just bare perception. And then that elaborates itself further into this, into the activity of papancha, or into the papancha proliferates. So a little bit of papancha becomes more papancha, becomes more papancha, becomes more papancha. It's like a kind of, actually, I think one of the senses is like it's spreading out. It's like a tree or a plant that's starting to grow. So what Bhikkhu Bodhi translates, and we've used Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation here. Let me just scroll back to it. It says, what one feels, one perceives, what one perceives, one thinks about, what one thinks about, that one mentally proliferates. With what one has mentally proliferated as the source, perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a person with respect to past, present, and future. What Thanissaro Bhikkhu says is, based on what a person objectifies, the perceptions and categories of objectification assail them with regard to past, present, and future forms cognizable via the eye. So one of the interesting things about the way the Buddha describes this process is he first talks about dependent on the eye and the eye consciousness and the sight, there's a meeting of the three, which is contact. With contact as condition, there's feeling. And this is an impersonal process, or he describes it as an impersonal process. And then he says, what one feels, one perceives. So it starts to become a little bit more personal. I get involved. So we move from impersonal arisings to something that's personal that I'm doing. And then by the end of it, we've got to not I'm doing it, but it's being done to me. The proliferations are besetting me. Yeah. So it's like a process that we engage with then runs away with us, if you like. So there's another sutta which I'm going to mention more in terms of the what are some of the ways that we can skillfully engage with this, which also talks about papancha, which is in the Digha Nikaya, the long discourses, the questions of Sakka, the king of the gods, who goes to the Buddha. And there's this incredibly long sutta, Digha Nikaya 21, Sakka's questions, which also talks about papancha. And so I'm just going to read you what Thanissaro Bhikkhu has to say about papancha there. He says, it's the tendency of the mind to proliferate issues from the sense of self. This term can also be translated as self-reflexive thinking, reification, falsification, distortion, elaboration or exaggeration. In the discourses, papancha is frequently used in analyses of the psychology of conflict, just as we were talking about in the opening of this sutta. The categories of objectification stem from the self-reflexive thought, I am the thinker, and include the categories of inappropriate attention, of this being or not being, me or not me, mine or not mine, doer or done to. The perceptions of objectification, papancha, include such thoughts as this is me, this is mine, this is myself. These perceptions and categories turn back on the person who allows them to proliferate, giving rise to internal conflict and strife, which then expand outwards. So this is this thing, papancha. There's also an interesting etymology given for, or wordplay with papancha. Pancha means five, like the Panchasila, the 5 precepts. And I think it was Bhikkhu Nyanananda and Venerable Analayo has picked this up as the 5 fingers of name. Maybe some of you are nodding, you've come across this. So nama is the mental name, or nama. We talk about nama rupa, name and form, or mind and body. And nama is the mental element of experience. And in any mind moment, according to the traditional analysis of this, the commentarial analysis, there is feeling tone, Vedana, there's perception, volition, Chaitana, contact, and attention. And it's as if these 5 fingers have all kind of got out of order. You know, this is a suggested wordplay or association of this papancha, proliferation. Okay, I am going to, Jerry, please. You've raised your hand.
Somewhat hesitantly. I am for me that the dukkha, the most poignant part of dukkha is I'm 72 years old and here I am again with the same issues. It's the samsaric element of dukkha that really gets to me. So then clearly, and maybe it isn't so clear, this teaching to me seems relevant. However, I don't see it as, I just don't get the sense doors are the triggers. The sense doors are happening, but it's the software that only interprets it in one way. Uh, and am I interpreting it that way because of the self? Lately, while walking the dog at 7 in the morning along a vineyard, it's like, no, I don't think so. It offers me some familiarity, and it offers a way of dealing with uncertainty, which I think many of us are overloaded with uncertainty at this point in our history. But the tragedy of the only way to get out is to do more of the same thing. It's there for me. It's like, maybe you should think about that person. That's even when I said that to you, no one dances alone. If you're going to attack me, then of course, oh, here it is again. It must be my fault. Well, no, nobody dances alone. So that's a little bit of a break out of the software, as I'm calling it. But it's very interesting. And I even noticed with my dog, if he gets frightened, he repeats the pattern over and over again. So there is something about doing that. I don't know that necessarily it is a clinging, meaning it's not open to exploring other possibilities, but doesn't the path ultimately encourage us to explore other ways of seeing the world, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely follow everything you said because there's a lot in there, but I think what I'm hearing is like uh, something about habit and how much we live in a habitual world, and in a way we need habit to function, you know. So I think it's not that we can do away with habit altogether. It's like we need, but it's an incentive. Understanding this is an incentive to develop skillful habits rather than be the victim of or beset by unskillful habits, I think. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but I think this is kind of the direction of travel is like, patterns reproduce themselves. Well, let's make some good patterns here. So I'm recognizing it feels to me that this is a lot. And the next part of the sutta where Mahakachana goes on a little bit further about this, the manifestation of these the sense organ, the consciousness and the object, contact, feeling, perception, thinking, and proliferation is kind of a bit more complicated. So I'm going to suggest that, well, it's more long-winded and less juicy to read aloud, and it might benefit from you being able to actually give it some different attention and also us having a change of tempo. So I'm going to suggest that we take a 20-minute break during which you can get some refreshment, move your body a bit, and also have a read of this, what I've called Scene 4 Part 2B, for yourselves, if you wish, and then we can talk about that after our break and then move the discussion on to, okay, what are we going to do in the face of this predicament? Does that sound okay? So, before I give you some of my ditty, my views on this, anybody have any responses to reading the rest of the exposition from Mahakachana? Is there anything that struck you or puzzled? Miranda, please.
Again, briefly, there's two things that I find really interesting because of current circumstances. One of them is it seems to me that in the case of an addiction, where there's a trigger that suddenly you find yourself with a drink in your hand and you don't know how you got there. That at the point of Vedana, it takes a lot of work for that to be anything but pre-conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you have been addicted for a long time, your mind is in the habit of going straight from that pre-conscious moment into proliferation. And then all you can think about is where's you going to get the drink and all like that. And I never saw that direct link, sort of bypassing perception and bypassing many aspects of thinking. The other thing that came to mind when I read this last night, I have friends with dementia, and I'm wanting to kind of use this mapping of consciousness to understand better. I know that there is a larger interior life than can be expressed at many points in dementia. This was my experience taking care of my mother and of many of my friends who have had this. And sadly, I have many friends who have died with dementia. And if you have any thoughts on that, that's like one of my current, it's not a fascination without a point. It's a fascination because I want to be able to engage this better with more kindness and with more understanding, and with maybe to be able to sense some of that interior life that can no longer be expressed or expressed well. By learning their language, you can get a lot of the interior life out of them, even when they've lost the capacity to if there is still language. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'm sorry to take up time.
Very important and interesting thoughts and questions, and I definitely want to respond, and I want to just see what other questions are in the field, because whether they might tie together in some way. But definitely I have some thoughts on that, and would also be interested to hear whether you've had further thoughts on it for yourself. But anybody else having some questions arising or reflections arising from this part of the reading?
Maybe I'm getting ahead, and you'll get to this later. But when I start seeing contact followed by Vedana, my mind immediately jumps to the dependent origination. And when I look at the list, I don't see Papancha in there. I see Tanha and Upadana. I mean, I guess I kind of think of it as like a little offshoot of Tanha and Upadana, but I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah. And in my mind, there's a relationship actually to what Miranda was asking. And you're right. So did anyone else see the dependent origination in here? This kind of overlapping map. Yeah, Marianne, yeah. And also for me, I don't know, did anybody recognize this, which is also the underlying mechanism of dependent origination with the 12 links, this basic, what's called that conditionality, idapachayata, this conditions that, So yeah, I think there's this big overlap with dependent origination, and it's not, it's just like in this particular thing, we're looking at the Papancha, but of course it is totally tied up with Tanha and Upadana. So you can you can describe the flowering in different sets of terms, I think, depending on, what the Buddha is trying to do with the teaching, like which components would he point out. But you can see that it's all effectively the same process going on, actually, or at least in this is my understanding of it. We're talking about the same process, which is what I was thinking about with Miranda, your comment about, triggers of addictions, for example. But it's not, well, I mean, I guess we have many things that don't get, technically labeled as addictions, but a lot of our habit patterns are addictions, addictive basically. And so this whole process just kicks off really, really fast under the radar of consciousness most of the time. And you may know, and I've certainly bang on about it a lot, but where Ajahn Chah talks about dependent origination as being like falling out of a mango tree. I think he probably spent a lot of time as a young boy shinning up trees to steal mangoes and things, or pick mangoes, and then he'd fall out of the tree. And he said it's like all you know is that you've hit the ground and it hurts, but you don't really know what happened before you hit the ground. And that's really how we experience this most of the time. And so all these things are, I mean, when we're mindful, and particularly when we're in, we've simplified life, and maybe we're in a meditative space, we can see some of this process in with more detail, more granularity. But when we're going through our ordinary daily life, we probably just see the start point and the end point, or just the end point, or just a different, maybe in one situation, the Vedana aspect will be really clear, prominent in awareness. Maybe in another situation, it'll be the perception really strikes us. So a different piece of it will maybe stand out more. But this whole thing, it has a momentum of its own. And what I took from this, which kind of slightly from rereading this sutta and looking at this piece of it, where Mahakanchana goes into, when there is this, it's possible to discern that. So then this is another of these places where it's kind of, how do we translate this strange Pali expression, panyating panyapesati is the word, so he says it's possible when there's the manifestation of this, it's possible to point out the manifestation of that. Other translations, of course, Tanisro Bhikkhu likes to go for really kind of precise, but then totally difficult to get your head around in English ones. So he says, if you can delineate this, then it's possible that one will delineate a delineation of that. Bhikkhu Sujato, who goes for the common sense, straightforward English sort of expression, he says, when you discern this, it will be possible to, or when there's evidence of one, it will be possible to discover evidence of another. So when we can see this, we can also see that. Or when we can point out or declare or assert this is, then we can also declare that is. And then the contrast, when there's no evidence of, no ability to discern or to point out or to identify a feeling, we won't be able to identify or point out a perception, and so on down the chain. And to me, what struck me, because I've always thought, or I had always thought, that somehow we're being asked to get rid of papancha. Papancha is a bad thing that we need to get rid of. That was my kind of original perception of papancha. Papancha just refers to kind of crazy excess thinking that my mind engages all the time. And my job as a good yogi would be to switch off the papancha. But what this passage seems to me to imply, on reading it like this, is that actually the moment you have one of these links, all the others are going to be present. And it's only in the absence of any link that the others are going to be absent, which suggests to me that the whole process is in a way beyond our control. And the Buddha is not, I think, perhaps, and I haven't checked this out with any, scholars or senior teachers, but it seems to me currently on looking at this sutta, the Buddha's not saying you have to stop this happening. He says you have to recognize that it's happening, recognize the conditioned, dependently originated nature of the whole process, and therefore start to lose your fascination with it, your intoxication with it, and stop seeing in the pieces of it a source of delight and attachment, which is very different from saying, oh, you've got it wrong, if you've started elaborating your thinking. And so to come back maybe to, the case of dementia, and where all this kind of cognitive process has run away from people or run away with people, or is somehow not relatable in a way. We can't relate to them on that same cognitive level. In a way, maybe, is it, and Miranda, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and anyone else who has thoughts on this, is it that in some ways it doesn't matter as much as we think it does, because that's not what's important. It's the connecting from the heart, and the intention underlying the connection is more important than the content of what the mind is producing. And so we find what ways we can to connect and make contact. And just, the things that are known about, say, the effect of music for people with dementia and so on, that there are ways to connect in awareness and to relate other than through the proliferation of thinking, it seems to me. So I don't know whether that makes sense, or you have further thoughts on that, or anybody else has thoughts or experience around that.
I find it that actually describes something that I do when a concept is too complicated or triggering for her, in this particular instance, to roll back to something much more simple that we already understand between us, to reestablish the connection. And it can be totally unrelated, and finding clever ways to change the subject so that she doesn't feel like I've dropped her off, But on another on another level entirely, practical matters like a medical advance directive and what any of these things mean. Or am I going to try to get her to sit down and listen while we make out a will? Or am I going to just take in the information myself and do it as best I can? It's like on those levels, there are specificities that at some point I'll have to abandon if we can't do it. But that's one of the things that I'm looking for skillful means with, is at what point to simplify and how to simplify, and maybe take a step back on the proliferation aspect, move backwards down that chain, not to Vedana, obviously, because who knows what's going on, But does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a really tricky situation to be navigating, for sure. And actually, it's going to be like, okay, what's doable here and what's not doable? But how do I look after my heart and intentions and the other person's well-being and ease in the process? And you can see how so frequently I'm now thinking of like really, really tricky negotiations, even on the public level, that people get into, that there's so little awareness of the underlying intentions, triggers, and, heart qualities, and we get lost in the content of arguments so much. And this is, in a way, it's that when we have these kind of situations where we're dealing with people that we can't do that, then it's it's an education for us in some level.
I think listening to what you just said, that the answer is actually the same for both of my dilemmas, which is to step back to a place where we're already connected, to find a place where we're already connected. And from that standpoint, determine as best I can what can be done and what can't be done, since it's not a negotiation amongst equals, precisely, you know. And perhaps the more important thing that came into my mind as you were talking is to cause no harm to her, to not make her feel bad about the position she's in, and for me to just not lose my mind over this, you know, because I can fly off and have to have no facial expression and just behave myself so well because actually I'm going nuts, you know, and that's like super unhelpful, and that I can really work with. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm a little bit younger than you, I think, but I'm coming up to the stage where, you know, I might be in this situation with both my parents at some time in the not too distant future. So it's really helpful to be discussing this and have some, you know, prior reflection about it. Yeah. So does anyone else have any thoughts about this? You know, is papancha inevitable or not? So maybe I just add, you can, I've asked for your thoughts, but I just wanted to add so my recognition here is that perhaps a degree of papancha is inevitable as part of the way the mind is constructed, that we do when we, in order to, it may be, you know, when one's in a deep state of meditation, in, you know, in some kind of, you know, absorption that involves neither perception nor non-perception or something, that you're not actually engaging with this. But to the extent that we function in the ordinary life, some degree of objectification is inevitable. You know, we have to know where our car, even the Buddha, I mean, he didn't drive a car, but if he were living now, he'd have to know where his car was and which were his car keys and which were his front door. You know, so there is some identification, objectification that goes in it. But I think that the difference, the really key piece in this teaching is about how much we delight in these things and how much we attach to them and how much we identify with them. And it reminded me of this passage in the Dhammapada that Kitty Saro, who's been an important teacher for me, really, really loves. I've only got Gil Fronsdal's translation here, which is not the one Kitty Saro quotes, but it's and this is also listed in the resources on that sheet, the PDF that I gave you, but it's verses 254 and 255 in the Dhammapada, where it's talking about papancha, and it says, no path exists in space, or the one Kitty Saro reads is there are no footsteps in the sky. No path exists in space. No contemplatives exist outside the Buddha's teaching, is Gil's translation. The one I know from Kitty Saro is, you won't find the sage out there. There are no footsteps in the sky. You won't find the sage, the Buddha, out there. Ordinary beings, people are enamored with obsessive thoughts. Tathagatas are free of obsessive thinking. So it's actually ordinary people delight in papancha, and Tathagatas delight in nipapancha, non-proliferation. Yeah. So I'm not sure that it means that Tathagatas never proliferate. It just means that they don't fall under its spell, and they don't take delight in it, and they don't take a stand on the fruits of their proliferations or their perceptions. I mean, you could debate with me, and you're welcome to choose a different view, that maybe they don't do proliferation, but they certainly have perception and feeling and so forth. But they don't form an identity from it. They don't take it to be permanent. They don't take it to be fixed. They don't form an identity from it and take a stand on it. which means that there's a freedom to respond appropriately, as we were talking about, the Dhamma being an appropriate response. So it repeats this thing. It says, so there are no footsteps in the sky. You won't find the sage out there. Ordinary people delight in papancha. Buddhas delight in nipapancha. There are no footsteps in the sky. You won't find the sage out there. All things, no created or fabricated things are permanent. But Buddhas never waver, are unagitated. So the difference then between an awakened person and an ordinary person is that ordinarily we delight in, welcome and hold on to papancha and all its roots, or different roots, in this kind of cascade from contact through Vedana, through perception, through thought, to the proliferation of thought. And we take a stand on it. And whereas an awakened being doesn't take a stand anywhere, and this is why they're untraceable, or they can't be found, or as the way that's translated, there are no footsteps in the sky. But I forgot this this morning. I was, because it's afternoon here, this morning I met up with one of my sisters and her enormous dog to go for a walk. And then we drove our cars to this little cafe afterwards for a coffee. And I was following my sister's car down the hill. And I just noticed the difference in perception of my sister's car versus all the other cars that were around. And it reminded me of my relationship to my mother's car as a child. And I don't know whether any of you had that, or in relation to our own cars. What is it that makes our own cars look so different and special to us? And for some of us, it's almost like they're a kind of member of the family or something. Or maybe your phone does that, where your phone leaps out at you in a way that other people's phones don't. But I certainly remember that sense of somehow my mother's car as a child had a kind of whiff of my mother about it. It's almost like it was an extension of her personality. If you saw your mother's car, you felt somehow that she was there. And I just had this flashback to that, following my sister's car down the hill, or really feeling that in the body, that sense of that sort of that relationship and the perceptions of mother, or whoever is the most significant figure or figures when we're very young. That shapes our world, of course, we all know that. But this is just, it's an amalgamation of sense data that we took in. We saw them, we heard them, we smelled them, we tasted the food that they gave us, we heard the words that they spoke, etc., etc. And this is our makeup. And it's not that we can get away from that, but how do we, many of us, our whole life's journey is coming into a wise relationship with that matrix that we were born into, So so just to sort of recap this point, that I think that and if one finds some of this stuff like too challenging to wrap our heads around, and there's certainly parts of the map of dependent origination that it's very difficult to wrap one's head around, bits of it that seem more accessible, bits of it that seem more obscure, but I think it's less important, the detail of how our world is fabricated, than the fact that we recognize that it is fabricated, or fabricated, to Nisaro's word, or constructed, and our perceptions and so forth, our perceptions, views and opinions are conditioned and, in a sense, unreliable. So I love Ajahn Chah's teaching. Some of you have heard me talk about it before, of you know, that everything is uncertain, that he almost used this like a mantra. And anicca, it was his actually way of rendering anicca, impermanent, was not a sure thing, not a sure thing. My nair in Thai. It's uncertain, it's uncertain. So as a reminder to not to take our perceptions and notions so seriously. So I also wanted to spend some time, we've got some time left, that I want to spend some time on, you know, what are some of the ways that we can remedy our tendency to cling to, get bogged down or glued by unskillful tendencies around our perceptions, notions, and papanchas. But does anyone want to come back on anything that I've said just now before I move on to that last part? Dochi, hey.
Thank you again. Yeah, I think I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the way you just added a little subtlety to the word papancha and how, you know, I was interpreting it and trying to, you know, work with it. Like, oh my God, let me try to like stop, you know, clinging, you know, it's just like you say it, but it's just, I mean, in actuality, it's just such a big thing. I'm like, okay, Chitty, I'm not going to cling, you know, it's like, it's not going to happen, you know, but it's like I do stuff like that. But I do like the idea that no, it's going to happen. You just need to recognize when it's happening. Not that I have to stop it, because you know it's like just something that I can't stop. I try to stop it. I always say I'm gonna stop it, but I don't. You know, so I like that. I like that part, that I'm gonna feel like I gave me something to work with a little differently. And the other thing was, even as actually as I was driving home, you know, from my having spent the night somewhere else, and knowing I was going to be in this class, I kind of like, you know, driving along and just looking at everything, you know, trees, cars, whatever, you know, in the eyes, just the scene. But I was just trying to imagine, like, how would I be? How would I be able to, for reals, be in the real world without, you know, like attaching, identifying, you know, like a craving, you know, getting into it with my neighbors, my family, my whatever. I just was like, it just seems like, what would I be doing? Just sitting here doing nothing, like, nope, I don't crave anymore. I don't do this. I don't attach. I don't, you know, whatever. It was just strange. And then now I'm here.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah. Who else? Oh, Ross. Ross, hello.
Hello, wonderful to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
Could you say more about the relationship between feeling and perception? Um, because if I'm correct in dependent origination, it's feeling as a with feeling as a condition, um, there's
Tanha.
yeah, there's clinging or wanting, or
Yeah.
and so perception is in some way that's the place where dependent origination diverges from
Mm-hmm.
what the order that this sutta is in, and in particular for me, could perception arise before feeling? Because if we perceive something as a particular thing, that engenders feeling. So that's my confusion.
So I'm just thinking, hang on. Vedana, Tanha. So Sanya doesn't occur, perception doesn't occur in the
No,
12 links of dependent origination.
no.
My understanding is that it's simultaneous with Vedana.
Ah,
So that's where it would fit in that thing, and that's what these 5 fingers of name are suggesting. This theory that all those things are present in any one mind moment, so it's simultaneous. The Vedana and the perception. I mean, and it may generate then, one might be aware of the Vedana and then it might generate a new perception, but there's always perception happening along with the Vedana, and they condition each other, in fact.
so in a certain sense, it's like nama, rupa, and consciousness, that they're 2 sheaves of wheat that are supporting each other.
I think so. I think so. That's in my, yep.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could make, share the diagram of the 5 fingers with us, if there's some way to do that, I would love to.
I can. The other quick way you can do it is just honestly put in 5 fingers of name Buddhism into your search engine.
Okay.
And Google's AI has gone so ridiculous recently that you can basically call up anything. You can say, where did the Buddha say a chicken with 2 eggs? And it will bring you up a sutta reference. Although I'm told that we should take care because some of its syntheses of information can be very misleading. So I think what I'm using it to do is to kind of look for a source, but then go back to the original and check that I haven't been misled by something that, the search engine has thrown up for me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth has her 5 fingers raised.
On this, the 5 fingers of name, a group that we studied with Bhikkhuni Dhammadina, and she shared with us, it was the paper by Bhikkhu Nalayo. So if you add Bhikkhu name Nalayo to 5 fingers of name, you'll get a paper which he was happy to share with everyone. So it wasn't something, kind of protected or anything like that. And it's excellent. Going back to what you just said about Nam in dependent origination, components of Nama. I just want to see if I've understood correctly. I thought that that the parts that make contact, you can't really, they just happen and you can't really do an awful lot about that. But then if there is sati, I thought that the attention was something that you could direct. It's the thumb. It's the thumb that kind of, I used it a lot when I'm sitting, and I just how do I want my attention to be? If my mind's drifting off, I'm not really, there's not enough interest, there's not enough energy or something, and I kind of, I'm sitting with my hands like this, and I actually feel the thumb. I thought, oh yeah, bring your thumb in, because in the paper that he wrote, he says, the thumb is often in a kind of like a clenched fist, but you can take the thumb out and you can use it to direct yourself in the way you're approaching what you're doing. Have I understood that correctly, or?
Absolutely, I have read the paper, but not recently. So thank you for pointing that out. I think that's absolutely correct, and really that's material to where we're coming on to next about, okay, so how do we engage with the situation, and what do we do?
Yeah, well, going back to the dependent origination, this is, from with the in retreats and everything with John Peacock, and what I understood was the weak link in the whole thing is the Vedana, and if you can be mindful when the Vedana I mean, obviously in a situation of real obsession or addiction or whatever, but for many of us, it's maybe not that extreme, or I don't know,
Yes.
but so recognizing that, and you can kind of like jump off the wheel, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, Vedana is the weak link because Vedana is not optional. Vedana is going to arise and perception is going to arise, I think, but it's the tanha that we actually have to do tanha. It takes some effort to do tanha. And with sati, we can actually let go of that effort and not do the tanha. So I think you're absolutely right. That's the weak link in the chain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Rebecca, you had your hand up. Have you taken it down again?
Well, if time allows. Something really struck me in this sutta, which was the way that Mahakachana says that the Buddha has come to the essence and gives the deathless. And your quote of "there are no sages in the sky," and that this papancha, so seeing it with the Pali of Sankhya and perception and formations are being actually the bundles. We're talking about the aggregates of formation being rooted in this very process. So it's like the compassion and the gift of giving us an ability to see this rather than just live our whole lives, which we're habitually mostly doing anyway, which I think it was someone commented on that, walking their dog, realizing like, here I am again with this. Okay, so the compassion for that. But I like the recall of the sheaves of wheat, because the unhooking of the nama rupa with consciousness or with bare perception. So perception can be perception, and he's describing that with, in the absence of, so that we can see through. But I appreciate all the comments because it's weaving into me the feeling that this is providing a feeling of safety, this habitual thinking, right? So it's an ability to glimpse the deathless and become a little bit comfortable with being in the formless and opening up to the formless through the heart, right? That there's a safety and more to our experience that he's pointing to than what the thinking is wrapping. It just feels like a tangle in the mind, right? So the full understanding of taking just this time to delve into this is almost like he's giving us the doorway to the deathless in every teaching that he offers, no matter what it is. And that this particular, whether there's a pleasure in it, or I think the other word was a threat in it, whatever we're getting from this process that encourages it right within us, this may be one of the most, and the conflict in the world, as we can see, this may be one of the most important nuggets of being a human being that he could have ever addressed. It's like the most monumental gift in the world to be able to give us, to even kind of be able to have the faculty to see through it a little bit, right? And it kind of brings up a lot of emotion for me, actually. Of how big it really is to sit with that the nama rupa can subside, that the key to the deathless is for that to subside, to just like not touch it, to let it come and go.
Exactly. So I would just like give a slight, I think what you've said is beautiful, and I really, get it. It is profoundly moving. And I would just give it a slight reframe as that it's the clinging, in a way, all the message of every sutta to me is about don't cling. Don't cling. It's like, let's not cling to this whole conditioned process of nama rupa and everything that flows on from it.
Yeah, what life means to us and for us, and that, I mean, there's such a clinging to hold dear, right, to all of it. But it creates so much pain on the flip side of it. It just gets bigger and bigger as we sit together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to also say, share a bit, like a couple of suttas that I think speak more to actually, well, how do we, given this predicament, how do we engage with this? And coming back to this long, and I'm not going to go into the whole sutta because I would have to go back to it and really spend some time with it. And I haven't looked at it for a long time, but this Sakka's questions in this Digha Nikaya 21, which also is a bit like this sutta in that it's asking about conflict and what's the roots of conflict. So this Sakka, the king of the gods, comes to the Buddha and says, why is it that devas and humans alike, even when they wish each other, they want to wish each other well, when they're holding the thought, may all beings be, free from suffering, may all beings be well, end up fighting with each other? Yeah. And the Buddha says it's because of envy and stinginess, liking and disliking, desire and thinking, and papancha, proliferation. So it's very much bound up with liking and disliking and desire, and very much related to conceit, how we take a stand on, make an identity out of these perceptions and notions and all their building blocks, our sense data, our perceptions, and so on. And so the Sakka then asks the Buddha, well, how do you practice, Venerable Sir, to bring all this to an end? How do you practice for the right cessation of papancha? And the Buddha gives Sakka a really pragmatic answer. He says, there are two kinds of happiness in the world, one to be pursued and one not to be pursued. There are two kinds of unhappiness in the world, to be pursued and not to be pursued. Two kinds of equanimity, two kinds of bodily conduct, two kinds of mental conduct, to be pursued, bodily and verbal conduct, to be pursued and not pursued. And he said, whatever kind of joy or grief or equanimity you pursue that causes unskillful qualities to increase, this is not to be pursued. Whatever kinds of happiness or sorrow that cause skillful qualities to increase, these should be pursued. And the same for bodily and verbal conduct. And there are two kinds of search, to be pursued and not to be pursued. The ones that lead to the increase of unwholesome qualities or unskillful qualities, and ones that lead to the increase of skillful qualities. In terms of sense door contact, so particularly that's what we've been looking at in the Honeyball Sutta, and the contact that initiates this whole process of perception, feeling, thinking, and proliferation. He doesn't say it should be stopped. He said you should know which sort of sense contacts are to be pursued and which are not to be pursued. And he doesn't even tell you what those are. He says it's just you have to reflect for yourself which ones cause skillful qualities to increase, which ones caused unskillful qualities to increase, and, develop accordingly. And so he sums it up by saying it's by following that which should be followed and not following that which should not be followed, that the cessation, the right cessation, the nirodha of this papancha comes about. So how papancha is let go of. And Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who you can also, if you haven't, some of you will have probably done this in the past or even around this session, looked up on Access to Insight, Thanissaro Bhikkhu's translation and notes on this Honeyball Sutta. He says, well, how can this process be ended? And he says, through a shift in perception caused by the way we attend to things, the way we attend to our feelings. He says, using the category of appropriate attention. So here is this manasikara, the thumb of the 5 fingers of name, because we can, with mindfulness, make a choice about how we direct our attention. To what do we direct our attention? And he references the second sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, this sutta on all the taints, or all the taints are all the unskillful qualities or things that cause us to latch on, if you like, the kind of the glue of unskillful qualities. And the Buddha doesn't say, you know, they're all to be got rid of or uprooted in the same way. He says, depending on the nature of the attachment or the kind of thing that it's talking about, some of these things are to be let go of by knowing what we should and shouldn't pay attention to, or what's helpful and unhelpful to pay attention to. This is called taints to be abandoned by seeing. Some things we have to know where we need restraint or not restraint. So restraint of the sense doors. Am I going to go looking at that thing or listening to that thing, or, you know, seeking out this, that, or the sensory experience? Or is that one that it's unhelpful for me to go seeking out? You know, for me, for example, I know that I can no longer tolerate watching very violent or disturbing films for entertainment. You know, what's the help of that? I know at a certain point I get news saturation, or I need to be careful about which sources of news I take in and how much. I also there's a certain point at which I know, well, actually, I feel too disengaged or oblivious to what's going on in the world, and I actually actively want to go and seek out some things, because that supports connection and compassion. So though, you know, both those pieces come into the equation. And then there are other things that we simply have to tolerate. And that is the practice, you know, when nothing can be done about something and there's a situation that we can't get away from. It's not that we're doing something wrong because that situation is there. You know, actually, the way that we burn through the defilements, to use very traditional language, is patient endurance. And then other things, and this is very sort of like up in the consciousness as a monastic, you know, what he calls the taints to be abandoned by using. It's like, well, we have to look after this body, we have to clothe it, we have to house it, we have to feed it. So we're not going to overcome attachment to food and clothing and lodgings by just saying I'm not going to have them. It's like we have to come into a wise relationship with these things, you know, and see, can we use it in a way that is not feeding greed, hatred, and delusion, in a way that's feeding compassion, wisdom, and supporting this body so that I can engage with my practice or develop the qualities that I want to manifest in wholesome ways in the world, and so on. And then other things that we may actually need to get rid of, like a thought of cruelty or a thought of ill will. And then there are the different techniques. And it's interesting to me that this Honeyball Sutta, you may have noticed, comes directly in the Majjhima Nikaya, immediately before the 2 really famous suttas on working with thoughts and thinking, the 2 kinds of thought and the dispelling of distracting thought. To me, that's not a coincidence that that's where it's situated, you know. So there isn't, you know, a single answer to this. Again, it's going to be situation appropriate, but the practice is having recognized the unreliable, not to be taken a stance on, conditioned, and inevitably prejudiced in some sort of way. And I don't want to use that necessarily in the terms of like prejudice as a pejorative negative thing, but we are all meeting the moment through a lens. And Rob Babea from Gaia House was very good at recognizing this and pointing this out, to think that we have a moment that's free of some kind of participatory fabrication that we're bringing to it is not true, because we're always looking out at the world through a lens of some sort. But if we're aware of that, then we can, now I'm adopting Martine Batchelor's language, we can creatively engage in the process, and see, well, okay, what method of nurturing skillful qualities and allowing unskillful qualities to decline is going to be appropriate to this. So I've said a lot in a rather a jumble there, and we're getting towards the end of our time together. So I'd love to hear anything from anyone about what this means to you and how you work with it. Becky, or was that an arm stretch?
I was actually throwing something for my cat to fetch, but but you got to do
You
it.
were caught in the gesture.
Actually, this the part of the sutta that we just looked at reminded me, and this may be completely off the wall, but Guy Armstrong uses mentions a sutta and an analogy in his book on emptiness about it's the one where he compares consciousness to sunlight not falling on anything. And in a way that reminded me of this, because if we cannot grab with the mind and just let things land, it's not that they're not going to arise and pass away. It doesn't seem, I mean, even papancha, it's just a thought, right? I mean, it's hard to remember that, but it is. So anyway, that's my cat wisdom for the day.
Thank you to you and your cat. Yeah. I realized I also referenced, because it's there in your list of suttas referenced, I also just thinking about, there's another sutta where there's this same identical exchange with Mahakachana, like the Buddha gives a short teaching and then the monks realize that they didn't get enough information and they go to Mahakachana and he tells them, oh, you foolish men, why didn't you ask the Buddha when you had the Buddha there? In exactly the same words, which is a single excellent night, which is Majjhima Nikaya 133. And this is also about so a single excellent night, the Buddha said, is when you don't spend your time kind of running back to effectively proliferating about the past. You don't spend your time running into the future, proliferating about the future, but you insightfully examine what's happening right now. And Mahakachana explains it again in terms of like taking delight in reconstituting the past in your mind, or kind of projecting yourself into the future where you want such and such a source of happiness, but actually that the skillful thing to do is to actually know clearly what's going on right here, right now. So just relating that a little bit to this. But as you see, it can go in all directions, because as with everything, it's like contemplating a particular thing is a doorway into everything we know about the teachings, as you're bringing in some really rich things, all of you. So we've just only got a few minutes left. I'm just wondering any comments or questions or things, and also from people who haven't said anything yet, if you want. How do you feel about this old friend of ours, the Honeyball? A new friend for some of you, so really acknowledging that this is, you know, new to some people. I really you know, appreciate that it, for me, it feels like it's turning me back all the time to look at, okay, what's going on in the heart right now? You know, I get so lost in what's going on out there, and it's not that what's going on out there doesn't matter or even doesn't exist, but actually what's really important is what's being generated in this heart mind right now that is both shaping what's being experienced out there, but also what's responding to what's perceived out there. And all these teachings seem to point us back to that responsibility.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't have my video on, but I've been thinking about how often I hear teachers talk about the what do they call it? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting a blank. Rain.
Rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, for dealing with practically any kind of problem you're having in your you know, so you know, it seems like, you know, some of what you're pointing to has relationship to that. So you want to talk about rain as a solution, or not a solution, but a way of addressing these things?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because but you know, RAIN is this acronym for recognize, allow, investigate, and then
non-identification.
Non-identification, or there are all sorts of actually alternative renditions of the N. So I think Tara Brach also uses nurturing, and also natural awareness, but basically declinging, non-identification, and also perhaps giving some kind of appropriate compassionate response. I think that's where the nurturing comes in. But so this RAIN acronym is usually taught in relation to the hindrances. But the way that you said it, you know, it's a response to just about everything, any problem at all. I think that's actually true. You could say that if there's a problem, there's a hindrance around of some sort, mild or gross. That's would be an interesting thing to consider or explore. But I think you're right, because this is the work of practice. It's recognition, becoming mindfully aware of what is actually happening. Allow is like moving into a relationship of non-conflict with what is already manifesting, which is not to say that we, you know, necessarily condone or want to perpetuate it, but it's like this moment, the recognition that this moment is as it is now and it couldn't be otherwise. And then investigate, you know, really putting it under the lens of Dharma, and moving away from clinging to non-clinging and to a more caring and compassionate relationship to what's here. So I think you're absolutely right. It applies kind of across the board. And so, bringing it to this also. So thank you.
You're welcome. I appreciate this whole talk. It was very appropriate for the moment for me.
Good. And then I just wanted, Neil's got his hand up. I'd just like to hear from Neil, and then that will be our last question, I think, or comment.
Well, thank you so much, Jaya, for this really great discussion. So very briefly, what I really liked about this sutta was how it describes all this internal mental machinery kind of linking up from contact that we're not usually aware of, but that can constantly get us into trouble if we're not paying attention to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Rob. Great. And thank you everyone for being here, for your kind attention, and for supporting each other also, because this wouldn't happen if you weren't all showing up for it. And it's just really nice to feel the interest in these teachings and your commitment, all of you, in all our different locations around the world at a time where our world is kind of unraveling, and just nice that we stay connected and plugged into some Dharma together. And